No one in the quiet village of Rodden ever imagined that the forest behind the old stone ridge held anything but foxes and forgotten trails. Tucked away in the northern expanse of Europe, Rodden was a place where the wind whispered ancient tales and trees stood as if guarding secrets from a time before man had learned to write. It was in this very village that Elias Kramer, a 35-year-old geologist with a stubborn curiosity, found himself face to face with a phenomenon no science could explain. Elias had grown up with stories his grandfather told him. Strange echoes in the forest, rocks that hummed in the moonlight, and the tale of a hole that swirled like smoke and swallowed the voice of time itself. As a boy, Elias had laughed, assuming the old man had mixed too many whiskeys with his evening pipe. But as a scientist, he couldn't deny that there were odd magnetic readings near the ridge and peculiar fault lines that didn't match any known tectonic pattern. It started on a cloudy morning in October. The air felt electric, like a storm had just passed or was about to begin. Elias, along with his assistant Marta Voss, ventured into the ridge to map a series of newly exposed basalt columns. They moved slowly through damp leaves and tangled undergrowth, the GPS on Marta's tablet flickering with uncertainty. The deeper they walked, the more their equipment acted strangely. Compasses spun, digital devices lost time, and the birds fell silent. "Do you hear that?" Marta asked, her voice hushed. Elias paused. "No, I hear nothing." And that was the strangest part. Even in deep wilderness, silence was rare. There was always the chirp of insects, the rustle of wind, the far-off call of birds. But here, near the base of a peculiar concave formation in the ridge, sounds seemed to fold inward. Elias stepped forward and noticed a distortion in the air, not visible exactly but felt, like walking through thick water. The space ahead of them shimmered, not in light but in pressure. His breath caught in his throat. "It's here," he whispered. "The anomaly," Marta pointed. "Look." Between two leaning slabs of basalt, nestled in thick moss and lichen, was a hole. It wasn't large, perhaps 6 feet wide, but it pulsed faintly. Not visually. The pulsing was in their bones. Elias took out a stone and tossed it in. There was no sound, no thump, no echo. It simply vanished. Elias marked the spot with a flare and activated his voice recorder. Day 14 of Ridge Survey. Located phenomenon at 52.4 degrees north, 8.6 degrees east. Apparent gravitational anomaly, then Marta screamed. He turned just in time to see her slipping into the hole, her hand reaching out and vanishing like smoke. Without thinking, Elias lunged. He expected rock or cold air or nothing. But he felt something tug, like a rope being pulled into a storm drain. There was a second of spinning and pressure, then darkness. When he opened his eyes, the sky was red. The forest was gone. The ridge was gone. Even the air smelled different, thicker, rawer, and electric with the scent of ozone and sulfur. Elias sat up. The sky had two suns, one a glowing orb, and the other a pale twin hanging lower on the horizon. Around him were trees unlike any he'd ever seen, massive, bulbous trunks with skin like metal and leaves like black glass. The ground was spongy and shimmered with bioluminescent veins. "Marta!" he shouted. No answer. He stood and scanned the area. A nearby rise gave him a better view. To the west, a great valley opened, covered in strange moving forms, some reptilian, others entirely alien, with translucent skins and flickering colors. To the east, cliffs of glass-like rock loomed, carved with symbols that shifted and rearranged themselves when stared at directly. Time didn't feel right here. His watch spun backwards, then forwards, then stopped. His breath misted despite the heat. Above, the sky darkened and lightened without logic. He was not in any known geological epoch. This was something else. He wandered for hours, or was it minutes, until he heard the first voice. Not human, but language. Shapes in the air carried not by sound but thought. Images filled his mind. Burning skies, a gate torn in time, a warning. The hole is not a portal, it is a wound. He stumbled away from the voice, falling into a ravine of crystal dust. There he saw her, Marta, curled and alive but unconscious. Around her were the remains of what looked like gear, shards of plastic, a broken tablet, even part of a boot that seemed a century too old. As he reached her, the ground pulsed. Then it moved. A massive creature, neither beast nor machine, emerged from beneath the ridge. Its skin was made of mirrored plates, its eyes countless orbs that watched from all angles. It stepped over them, sniffed the air with a whip of tendrils, and walked away. Around its feet, the earth bent inward, rippling like disturbed water. Elias held Marta close, shielding her. Her eyes fluttered open. "We're not on Earth," she whispered. "No," Elias said, "or not our Earth." They found remnants of others, signs of ancient camps, stone tools mixed with modern metal, fossilized boots, parchment etched with equations. They weren't the first to fall through the time hole, but no one ever returned. That's what the messages said. That's what the carvings screamed. The hole was a place where time collapsed, where epochs bled into each other. The Precambrian danced with the 31st century. Beasts from Earth's first breath walked alongside machines from its last gasp. It wasn't meant to be crossed, but something was trying to come through. The shifting twilight above twisted again, as if time itself was turning inside out. Elias helped Marta to her feet. She was shaky but lucid, her pupils adjusting sluggishly to the red-gold sky. The terrain around them pulsed in subtle rhythms, like the breathing of a buried leviathan. Everything, every rock, every gust of air, every flicker in the sky, reminded them that this was not a place, but a phenomenon. "We need to find shelter," Elias said, glancing at the hills that shimmered with geometric ridges, "and figure out how this place works. If there's a way in, maybe there's a way out." But Marta was already walking towards something half buried in the soil. It looked like a column, man-made, weathered, and inscribed with symbols that weren't of any known language. As she brushed the dirt away, a faint light emanated from the grooves, and the symbols began rearranging themselves like a Rubik's Cube in fluid motion. "These markings," she said, her voice dry, "they're communicating. I think this is a warning." Elias knelt beside her, watching as the symbols projected faint images into the air. A circle, a split in time, a cascade of life forms, and then chaos, a flood of time, where different species, objects, and even pieces of terrain collided. It showed the whole forming, not as an accident, but as the result of an experiment gone wrong. "We're inside a collapsed dimension," Marta said, eyes wide. "Someone, something, tried to open a bridge across time, but instead of a clean tunnel, they tore a hole through all of history." As if in response, the ground around them groaned and shifted. Large slabs of rock lifted from the soil like books from a shelf, exposing fossils that glowed faintly. Fossils of animals that had never existed, creatures that bore the limbs of trilobites, the heads of primates, and the silicon plates of machines. They were hybrid relics from overlapping ages, trapped in a place where time no longer made sense. Elias and Marta made their way toward a cliffside where the rock opened into a cavern. Inside, ancient carvings coated the walls, painted in a spectrum of mineral-based pigments. Some of the art resembled Neolithic handprints. Others looked like blueprints for machines so complex that they hurt to look at. In the center of the cave was a metallic orb, half buried, humming with a low frequency that made the stones vibrate. "We need to document this," Elias said, reaching for his satchel. But the electronics inside were dead. Even his notebook's ink began to fade, as if time had no patience for permanence here. Suddenly, the orb split open and released a beam of soft white light that pulled shapes into the air. Human figures, running. Some with modern tools, some with torches. Others were aliens or robots or things entirely unrecognizable. They all converged at a single point, the hole. Marta stepped forward. "This is a record, a chronicle. These are the ones who came before us, people from all over time sucked into the same anomaly." "They must have tried to close it," Elias said, "but none of them succeeded." Then the scene shifted. It showed something else, something emerging from the hole. A creature composed of time itself, ever-shifting, cloaked in the history of Earth. One moment it had wings of pterosaurs, the next it bore armor forged from future alloys. Its face was a clockwork blur, and its voice, a ripple that cracked stone. The light went out, the orb collapsed, and silence returned. They spent the night in the cave. Time flowed strangely. Minutes stretched and collapsed like rubber. Sleep was impossible. Dreams bled into reality. Elias saw his grandfather walking beside creatures from ancient seas. He saw himself at his own funeral, then as a child laughing inside the same cave. Marta saw a city made of glass floating in the sky, and herself turning into dust that danced with solar winds. By morning, if that's what it was, they moved out. The land had changed again. Trees grew in reverse, folding back into saplings and then vanishing. A herd of massive mammals, like woolly mammoths with elongated limbs, ran across the plains, pursued by a flying machine that resembled a pyramid. Everywhere they looked, timelines overlapped like layers of melted glass. Eventually, they reached what looked like a monument, an obelisk made of translucent metal, floating a few feet above the ground, surrounded by crushed gear and fossilized remains. A dozen skeletons lay around it, some human, some not. At the base was a device still humming with faint energy. Elias touched it, and time froze. Not completely, but the world slowed, as if someone had turned the speed down to a crawl. The creature from the orb appeared again, hovering just above the ground, observing him. Its voice filled his mind. "You are the last. The fracture grows. The root lies at the origin." Then the vision ended. Time resumed. Marta was shaking him. "You were gone for an hour," she said. "You just stood there. What happened?" He turned to her. "We need to find the origin, the moment this hole was created, wherever or whenever that is." Marta stared at him. "That could be billions of years ago." "Or tomorrow," he said. As they left the monument, they passed into a region where the sky flickered like a broken screen. Gravity fluctuated. The ground cracked in straight, hexagonal patterns, and voices echoed, not from any source, but from memory. They heard themselves talking, arguing, laughing, words they had not yet spoken. Then they saw it, the core of the anomaly. Floating in the air was a rip, a swirling, chaotic vortex of all things. Galaxies and molecules, wars and births, water and flame, the prehistoric time hole. They had reached the center, and something was waiting for them inside it. The hole hovered, spinning with no noise but immense presence, like a god breathing in reverse. It bent the world around it. Trees leaned toward it. Rocks vibrated. The air shimmered as though it were made of glass. Marta stepped closer, her hair floating as if underwater. Her skin glowed with streaks of light, a side effect of being near a rupture that defied not just time, but existence itself. "This isn't just a tear in time," she whispered. "It's a consciousness. It's watching us." Elias could feel it too, not like eyes, but a pressure in his mind. It was aware. It remembered. And in remembering, it altered everything, even the past, even them. Suddenly the hole pulsed, and they were no longer on solid ground. For a flickering instant, they stood on a desolate beach under 3 moons. The sea was frozen, yet full of motion, like time stopped midway through a tide. Then another pulse, and they were in a burning jungle with metal vines and a sky of black fire. Then another, and they stood before a creature the size of a mountain, weeping molten stars from its many eyes. Elias clutched Marta's hand, the only constant, her warmth, her breathing. "This is a defense mechanism," he gasped. "It's rejecting us or testing us. No, it's showing us." Then the pulses stopped, and the world stabilized into what looked like Earth, but not one they knew. They stood in a shallow basin under a green sky. The horizon was flat, the air heavy with sulfur. All around them were strange crystalline towers, like skyscrapers made of bones and diamonds. Each humming softly, a central spire reached high into the sky, and at its base stood something unmistakably artificial. A machine, or what remained of it. Dozens of prongs reached into the ground, pulsing faintly. Symbols scrolled along its frame, symbols Elias now understood. The machine had once been a time engine, an attempt by an ancient civilization to bend time, to move backward and forward, not in perception, but in reality. But they had failed, or worse, they had succeeded, and it had destroyed them. He reached out to touch one of the prongs. A wave of memory surged through him. Not his own, but those of engineers who lived before history began, beings who stood taller than men, their skin like copper, their minds mathematical. They had tried to save their species by leaping forward in time, escaping a dying sun, but the machine opened not a path but a hole, one that shattered the timeline into fragments and dragged all versions of existence into one tangled core. They built the hole, Elias said aloud. This is the origin, the root. Marta knelt beside a pile of debris, twisted plates of material that seemed to flicker between states. Solid, liquid, memory. On one panel, a sequence of activation points still glowed. She reached for it, and the entire basin shifted. Voices filled the air. Hundreds of languages, crying out, pleading, warning. Stop what you are. Undo the fracture. The creature has no origin. It is the result. Time must heal. The central tower shuddered and opened at its base, revealing stairs carved from floating slabs of obsidian. Without hesitation, they descended. Each step took them not down, but deeper, into time, into themselves. They saw flashes of their own lives, choices undone, paths not taken. Elias saw himself staying in the city, never pursuing geology. He saw himself die in a car crash at 16. He saw himself as an old man, alone, watching the rain. Marta saw a child she never had, a world where she lived as a scientist on Mars, another where she had never been born. The stairs ended at a chamber of mirrors, not glass, but time reflections. In each mirror, they saw versions of themselves entering this place. Some older, some not human, some injured. In one, Elias had no face. In another, Marta glowed like a being of energy. We've always come here, she whispered, over and over, in different forms. We're stuck in the loop. No, Elias said. We've reached the loop's core. This is our only chance to end it. At the center of the chamber hovered a sphere, the nucleus of the time hole. It was not large, the size of a human heart, but it pulsed with all moments. Every second, every eon, every birth, death, war, peace. Elias approached and felt himself age, then regress. His skin cracked, healed, turned to dust, then rewound. A voice emerged, not from the sphere, but from his own mouth. I am what remains when time breaks. It was the creature, the presence, the thing born from the failed experiment. The whole was its body. History was its mind. Every traveler who fell in fed it with memory and moment. You cannot kill what never began. You can only choose the first moment, the choice that prevents me. Elias understood. A decision had to be made, a choice that would undo the ignition event, the birth of the machine, the original fracture. But it came at a cost. I have to go back, he said. Back to the instant this began, before the first error. If you do, Marta said, you may erase all of this, everything we are, every moment since. He nodded. That's the point. She took his hand, and together they touched the sphere. In that instant, they were no longer human. They were observers. They passed through the formation of galaxies, the boiling of the early Earth, the rise of strange civilizations that left no trace, the moment when the builders of the machine gathered around their creation and hesitated. One of them, tall and copper-skinned, looked toward the future, toward Elias. He saw them, and he stopped. The machine was never activated. The hole never opened. Elias and Marta ceased to exist. But somewhere in the forest behind the old stone ridge in Rodden, a pair of hikers found a small circle of scorched earth, surrounded by crystals that hummed softly. They never explained it. They took no pictures. They simply stood in the clearing, hand in hand, feeling that something impossible had once been there and was now at peace. And the world turned quietly onward, whole. But time is not a line. It is a fabric, twisted, torn, and stitched in hidden places. While Elias and Marta were erased from the timeline where the hole never opened, echoes of them remained, like fingerprints pressed into the seams of reality. In alternate versions of the world, their presence persisted like ghosts, like gravity around events too strange to dismiss. In the Rodin Institute of Temporal Geoscience, established years after an unusual geological survey, Dr. Lisa Lumsel stared at a core sample from the northern ridge. It contained particles that should not exist in any known age of Earth, isotopes that belonged to no atomic table, fossils of creatures with no place in evolutionary history. And most confusingly, a name etched into a shard of crystalline basalt: E. Kramer. No one knew who had written it. It was carbon dated to nearly 12,000 years before the first known written language. Rumors circulated in whispers of an event, a phenomenon, a moment out of place, of a tear in reality that had once existed and then, inexplicably, ceased to. Liesel couldn't let it go. She requested an expedition. The site had long since grown over, the clearing forgotten beneath layers of moss and vine. But something still pulsed beneath the surface. Then came the dreams. First hers, then others in her team. Dreams of a red sky, of a being made of time, of a man and a woman stepping into a chamber of mirrors. One morning, Liesel awoke to find her hands glowing faintly, her skin tracing geometric patterns that faded before the sun rose. Her team began to suffer time slips, moments where hours passed in seconds, or a blink stretched into an eternity. The world didn't seem broken, just rewritten. The Institute shut down the expedition. Samples were locked in vaults. Officially, it was attributed to a contamination event. Unofficially, it was marked temporal residue, anomaly 47b. But others had noticed. In deep observatories in South America, instruments began registering impossible gravitational shifts near what were thought to be dormant tectonic lines. In Antarctica, a Russian science team uncovered metallic slabs beneath the ice that displayed the same rearranging symbols Elias and Marta once saw. In orbit, satellites caught flickers, like reflections, of structures that disappeared when focused on. And at the heart of every sighting, every fluctuation, was the same signature frequency, one that didn't belong to any natural phenomenon. It was the echo of a wound that had once torn the universe, stitched shut by two lost souls, now buried in the deepest layers of time. But the fabric still bore the scar. In a quiet lab beneath Geneva, physicist Nico Paul began decoding fragments of lost data transmitted by a failed Mars probe. Among the garbled signals, something strange emerged. Coordinates, Earth-based, and a message encoded in an ancient dialect of German. Don't build the machine. When decrypted fully, it contained schematics for a time engine, along with a logbook bearing the initials MV. Nico didn't understand how any of this could exist. The language, the design, the warning. But it wasn't the first anomaly he'd encountered. In fact, he'd been dreaming of it for months. And always in the final moments of sleep, he saw a woman with dark hair and glowing skin standing in front of a sphere of light, whispering across dimensions. "We bought you a second chance. Don't waste it." Time flowed on. The world turned. But somewhere, perhaps in the space between moments, in the fraction of a second that no clock can record, the prehistoric time hole still spun in reverse, not as a danger, but as a memory, a ripple, a ghost, waiting, watching, and whispering to those curious or unlucky enough to listen. And the wound was closed. But time remembers everything. And sometimes, it remembers how to bleed.